Hey, welcome to Crossroads. In today's episode, we'll be talking about Chinese military hackers right now allegedly preparing to shut down or practicing to shut down the American infrastructure, including the electric grid. Also, the World Economic Forum is warning of cyber attacks like this, crippling the US and other countries. And there's also talk now of the potential out of an artificial intelligence-powered computer virus and what this would mean to the world system when so much of it is now connected to the internet. Some very serious stuff. Let's talk about it. Now, first of all, what's happening right now? Chinese military hackers are accused of infiltrating the systems that basically keep America running. This includes the electric grid, its water utilities, its gas and oil systems, transportation, a lot of other systems. Now, the CCP is allegedly doing this in preparations for a potential cyber attack against the United States in the case of a war in the Pacific, or at least that's how it's being framed. Washington Post says this. It says the Chinese military is ramping up its ability to disrupt key American infrastructure, including power and water utilities, as well as communication and transportation systems, according to U.S. officials and industry security officials. It says these hackers affiliated with China's People's Liberation Army, the CCP military, have burrowed into the computer systems of about 24 critical entities over the last year, according to these individuals. And notes the intrusions are part of a broader effort to develop ways to sow panic and chaos or snarl logistics in the event of a U.S.-China conflict in the Pacific. Among the victims, it says, are a water utility in Hawaii, a major West Coast port, and at least one oil and gas pipeline, according to people familiar with it. Now, they said that they've also attempted to break into the one of the Texas power grids, which operates independently from electrical systems in the rest of the country, and several entities outside the United States, including electric utilities, also have been victimized by these hackers, according to these individuals. And of course, all of this is raising concerns of, well, if you have Chinese military hackers probing right now the electric grid of, and not just the United States, but of many countries, if you have them getting into the water systems, into the gas systems, well, what are they doing? And one of the possibilities is that they're first establishing access to get into the systems, and they could potentially maintain that access. There's also the potential they're planting things that are quiet, things that are not making noise right now, but could be activated at a later time. Now, I'll go deeper into my thoughts on exactly what's happening with this, including I'll show you, in fact, some of the Chinese military's plans, noting attacks exactly like this. We'll go into that soon. But first, I want to talk about some of the other debates online around this, because a lot of people are pointing to the World Economic Forum, interestingly warning of an attack that sounds almost exactly like this. I should clarify, there has not yet been an attack of this sort. What is happening right now is that Chinese military hackers have been discovered apparently planning or creating the capabilities for an attack like this. They're setting it up, basically. Now, when it comes to the World Economic Forum, they have discussed cyber attacks in the same way as COVID-19, in the same way as a global pandemic. They're saying that in the same way, the World Economic Forum, they've been saying this for 4 years-ish, and especially over the last 2 years, they've had a lot of different reports and claims about the threat of an attack of this sort. They're raising concerns over the idea of a cyber pandemic. The idea that just in the way that a virus spreads among humans and infects us and so on and so forth, that a bug or a virus could also spread within the electric infrastructure, within computers, within international systems that maintain the networks and computers that make societies run. Electric grid, water supply, traffic systems, maybe banking, who knows what else. They're discussing it again in the same way as a pandemic, and in light of discussing it as a pandemic, they're suggesting ways of challenge or trying to take it on as you would in preparation for a pandemic. And the World Economic Forum is suggesting the only way to stop a cyber attack of this sort that could potentially spread from device to device, much like a virus spreading human to human, is to be able to disconnect these electric devices from one another and from the internet. What does that mean? It means that they're suggesting there needs to be some kind of system that could shut down maybe individual devices, that could maybe monitor individual devices, that would have the capabilities of stopping a cyber attack like this from being able to spread. And that would have some pretty serious implications. I'll go into that. But first, let me show you a video from the World Economic Forum itself. This is from 2 years ago. Watch this.
You see, the only way to stop the exponential propagation of a COVID-like cyber threat is to fully disconnect the millions of vulnerable devices from one another and from the internet. All of this in a matter of days. A single day without the internet would cost our economies more than $50 billion, and that's before considering the economic and societal damages should these devices be linked to essential services such as transport or healthcare. As the digital realm increasingly merges with our physical world, the ripple effects of cyber attacks on our safety just keep on expanding at a faster pace than what we're preparing for. COVID-19 was known as an anticipated risk. So is the digital equivalent. Let's be better prepared for that one. The time is now.
Now that video was from 2 years ago, and some of you may have seen another video that was going viral. It was Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, and he was at the Cyber Polygon event in 2020. He was warning of a digital pandemic. And people are now pointing to this, given the news going around with, hey, this sounds a whole lot like what Klaus Schwab warned about, a few years back. And people are suggesting, well, is this some weird plan? Is there some weird thing going on? I'll give my thoughts on it, but let me show you first what he said. Watch this.
We all know, but still pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison.
Now again, these videos are kind of old. It's 2 years, almost 4 years. But just January this year, the World Economic Forum had another report also warning of a potential global cyber attack just like this. This is the report. Let me show you it. One interesting thing it talks about is the potential of an AI-powered computer virus. And what would that mean? This is actually something I've been thinking about as well. Look, in my opinion, actually on this, the World Economic Forum is actually raising a valid concern. I disagree with them on a lot of stuff. I think they're actually raising a very valid concern with this. The big threat the World Economic Forum is pointing out is something I've been thinking about, which is a computer virus using artificial intelligence. Now, normally when we talk about computer viruses, you're talking about pre-programmed viruses. You're talking about things that have set protocols of what they do, what they breach, what they go after, or that just open the door, so to speak. They create a doorway for human hackers to get in and find files or manipulate things or whatever else they want to do. An artificial intelligence running within a computer virus or running as a computer virus. This is something I don't think we've ever seen before. Now, I don't know if we've actually seen viruses like this. I haven't seen any reports of one existing like this. But the capabilities and potential now exist. And imagine a virus that could, for example, self-replicate. Imagine a virus that could create viruses. Imagine a virus that would be smart enough to get into your computer and stay there or learn to stay hidden. Or a virus that could go into a machine, probe the machine, and adapt to the environment, much in the same way as like a thinking person would be able to adapt to a social situation. Now, that would mean it would be very difficult to catch. It would be very difficult to find. It would be very difficult to get rid of. And it would also be able to adapt to the attempts to go after it. If a human were to, for example, try to program it out or delete it, the virus running on AI could react faster than a human could. The virus using AI could potentially even read the code inserted, from a person in order to try to take it down. And depending on how smart it is or how capable it is, I don't know if you could get rid of it. We've never encountered something like this. This is all hypothetical right now, but it does represent a very clear threat. Now, imagine if this could also go after the systems that that the internet depends on. Now, one interesting thing with viruses that's sometimes misunderstood is that a system does not necessarily need to be connected to the internet to get attacked. There have been viruses like this. You can take Stuxnet, for example. Stuxnet, we still don't know the real origin of it. It was blamed on the US and Israel, but Stuxnet was a specialized, very intelligent and designed computer virus that took down the Iranian nuclear project. And specifically, it went after the centrifuges, these nuclear centrifuges, moving machines. These were not connected to the internet, meaning that the virus either jumped systems or was brought in maybe on a USB stick or who knows what else. But Stuxnet was unique in that it could control SCADA systems, systems that operate mechanical parts. And what happened is when Stuxnet was used to infect this Iranian nuclear facility, it was able to speed up the fans of the centrifuges and destroy them physically. Oftentimes when we think of computer viruses, we're not thinking of physical attacks. We're not thinking of things that can move physical objects. But one important thing to note is that when you're dealing with the systems that run societies, when you're dealing with systems that manage facilities, when you're dealing with computers that can operate mechanical parts and moving, machines and so on, yes, if you can control them, if you can infect them, you can use the computer to also control the systems they're connected to. This does bring about some really serious concerns. For example, if the Chinese hackers, as we're talking about right now, were able to get into the water, they're breaching the systems that maintain the water supplies. There's been concerns among security researchers in the past of the potential of, let's say, hackers breaking into the sewage treatment plants and just releasing raw sewage into the water supply. There have been cases of this happening before. There was one case in Australia, for example, of a hacker doing that. There could be cases of, for example, breaking into the water purification systems that maintain, chlorine in the water and maybe adding a bit too much, in order to make the water poisonous. There are many things that could be done. Even if you breached the systems that, let's say, manage like train systems, for example, you could cause train crashes. If you broke into the systems that manage smart cities and traffic lights, you could cause car accidents. If you broke into emergency dispatch systems, you could create fake calls, you could create emergencies. There are ways you could even, for example, shut down or destroy electrical infrastructure using these systems. If you were to overload certain machines, if you were to change the way that systems operate and send things through that shouldn't be sent through at certain times, you can physically destroy using this type of cyber attack. Taking Stuxnet as an example, which is actually publicly available. If you were to even do something worse, like take Stuxnet and add in an artificial intelligence that could operate it, then you're dealing with a computer virus that has basically a gun, a digital gun. If you were to take an artificial intelligence and feed it different computer viruses and teach it how to use these things even, then you're creating a very powerful cyber weapon that could just wreak absolute chaos. Now, we talk about EMP attacks, electromagnetic pulse. And one of the big concerns with the electric grid is, hey, what if China launched an EMP and wiped out the electric grid? If the American electric grid were to go down, if it were to be physically destroyed, you can't immediately replace a lot of those systems. Some of it would take maybe years or at least a year to replace. And there are estimates depending, basically on food supplies, how long cities would last without transportation systems and food and so on. If we didn't have the systems that maintained, water supplies, just if the electric grid went down, there are estimates on how long people would survive. And a lot of them say that actually most people would not. Maybe within a year, a large part of the US population would die off. This is one of the very real concerns of an EMP attack. Let me briefly explain that. EMP was one of the things discovered in the early nuclear weapons tests. And what was found was that aside from the atomic bomb, there's an electromagnetic wave essentially emitted by nuclear weapons. These overload mechanical devices. When you talk about wiring or computer chips, they have a certain threshold of the amount of electricity they can hold. And when you're dealing with microelectronics, computers, and so on, they're very delicate. If you have an electrical surge, think you have a tube like that and there's a surge like this, it fries the system. And so as for example, an EMP travels, it can travel through, the electrical surge can travel through the electric grid and just wipe out every single thing connected to it because it can travel through the wires. Some of the security systems that have been proposed to fix that would be switches, for example, that would hit, the surge would hit it and it would stop there, like a surge protector in your house, only much more powerful because it could withstand a very, massive surge. Those have been blocked. The electric system, for the most part, there are some protections in place, but for the most part, doesn't have that kind of stuff. And so, if there were an EMP attack, let's say in the center of the United States, it could travel through the electric grid and just take out most of the electrical infrastructure in the entire country. That's the big concern with an EMP attack. Now, there are ways of doing that that don't necessarily need an atomic, a nuclear attack, like a nuclear weapons attack. One of the potential uses of this would be a high Earth orbit nuclear detonation. Imagine if North Korea, for example, or China were to launch a satellite and the satellite had a nuclear warhead installed on it. If that satellite were to orbit over the United States, they could detonate it in orbit. And even being in orbit, if it were over the central United States, it would still have the EMP effect. That is one of the big kind of doomsday concerns, that it would not need to have a ballistic missile. It would not need to be launched. They would not need to have, Rocket Man pushing the button. They could do it from orbit, and they wouldn't need to physically kill anybody with the nuclear warhead. The EMP would do the job of, destroying us, essentially. That is one of the big concerns with EMP. But you could potentially achieve a very similar effect using a cyber attack. And whereas an EMP could, potentially be traced back to the country of origin, at the very least, maybe we'd know which satellite it came from. We might be able to figure that out. You would not be able, or for example, if they brought in warheads on, let's say, shipping containers to major U.S. ports and detonated them there, it would destroy our military, and it would also have the EMP effect. A cyber attack would be different. You couldn't easily trace it. It could easily fall on the backs of terrorists, especially now that they've released a lot of this AI technology into the public. People can download a lot of the AI systems and toy with them themselves. It's a very powerful tool in the hands of pretty much anybody who wants it now. There are ways you could more easily conceal an origin when it comes to these types of things, especially, again, if you were to create an AI that could generate cyber attacks or cyber weapons. Now, The issue you have with cybersecurity, though, and this is where, going back to the World Economic Forum and people questioning, hey, is the World Economic Forum plotting something? Let me give my take on some of that. A lot of people right now, because there are reports that China is probing our infrastructure, our critical infrastructure, using its cyber army and, breaching systems that could potentially be pretty serious if they were to take them down. People are pointing, in context of that news, to World Economic Forum warning of a devastating cyber attack. I don't think it would be in the interest of the World Economic Forum or of any kind of globalist group to take out the electric grid, because a lot of these organizations, they're technocrats. They want this high-tech future. They dream of human innovation and human progress, and especially the systems they're proposing on digital currencies and digital IDs and digital surveillance and all these other things. The idea of destroying electrical infrastructure and the systems that would enable a lot of what it seems that they want to create would be counterproductive to their own agendas. The concern, though, is not necessarily cyber attack for me with this kind of stuff. The concern is how do they, if they're raising concerns over what that would look like, and they're calling for ways of mitigating a threat of that sort, the real issue you start having is what it means to have the technology to defend against a cyber attack like that. And this goes into something that a lot of people who've worked in the security, community understand. And, keep in mind, I was, I've been a national security reporter for a very long time, and I covered cybersecurity for a very, very long time. Even including the early days of anonymous hackers and LulzSec and stuff like that. I used to cover a lot of that stuff. The concern you start getting into when you delve into the weeds of policies and security systems to prevent cyber attacks is that there's a sliding scale where security is directly connected to privacy. If you have more security, it is going to infringe on privacy, and there's no way around it. The more secure the internet is, the more you've created technologies to potentially restrict the internet. The more secure you've made a system, the more you've created in terms of being able to monitor and surveil that system. And when World Economic Forum is talking about, for example, technologies that could potentially, they're raising concerns of a virus jumping from device to device and suggesting the only way you could prevent that from happening is by creating a technology or system or law that, I don't know what they want with that, but hypothetically, they would have the capabilities of disconnecting devices. And if you're going to create a government level or maybe even international level system that could connect individual devices from the internet, you've created something very concerning. You've created a technology in that case that would be able to control each individual's access to the internet, each individual's access to the web. And if you're doing that, of course, you're also creating a type of government infrastructure that would allow control to that degree. That is the real concern you get into with cybersecurity. And again, the extent to which we want to be secure and how we balance the real potential threats with the threat of, let's say, government overreach. Where do you draw the line? Now, that being said, the Chinese Communist Party, though, does have very real programs that target systems like this. Now, stepping back a bit, I would say that normal cyber attacks or EMP could be mitigated without the need for that type of totalitarian, internet system. You could mitigate the threat of a cyber attack, or mitigate the threat of an EMP attack just by putting switches within the electric grid, by putting surge protectors big enough and, with enough surge protection, let's say, to withstand an EMP attack. But when you start getting into the realm of a potential virus, maybe powered by artificial intelligence, that could wreak havoc along that same potential and do things that are that your imagination is the limit, basically, then how do you deal with that? Well, the problem with AI is that a lot of it's hypothetical. The problem with AI is that we don't know what it's going to be capable of. We don't know what it can do. We don't know how damaging it could be. And especially, we don't have systems in place to govern it, to protect against it, to mitigate potential threats, or to take into account what it could become. And that's where you start getting into the weeds of, well, to what degree do you create government systems to manage it? The Biden administration has issued orders to create systems to manage threats of that sort, as have some countries in the rest of the world, as have the European Union and others. And as they've created systems to mitigate that type of threat, they're connecting government oversight into a core technology that is going to be at the foundation of the entire internet system, probably the way that cities are managed, the way our individual lives are managed, the way your phones work, the way your computer works, the way the entire society functions. And that means that as more and more of society begins to adopt artificial intelligence, government now has a hand within that system. And so as it expands, depending on how far we allow it to expand, so too will expand government power and government oversight. We've already created this type of reality for ourselves. Now, let me talk a bit more about the Chinese side of it, because even though I am concerned about what cybersecurity means on this level, and especially as we're starting to see real threats of this sort come about, especially as we're starting to see technologies and, let's say, foreign militaries targeting systems in the manner that people are concerned about, there are some real concerns, I think, on the very practical stance of what China is doing. And my point being, I don't want to downplay these Chinese hackers and what they may be working on. It's a very delicate balance we're in right now between, again, real-world foreign military threats and, let's say, the potential of totally losing our freedom online, or as we begin to adopt AI into our daily lives, what it means if government oversight is part of that. When it comes to the Chinese military threat, they have a program called the Assassin's Mace. And I've been reporting on this for years. There are reports on this going back to the early 2000s. A lot of people were not discussing it. I think even now people are still kind of catching on. When we talk about military threats, now we talk about the Chinese military and we're looking at their, let's say, hypersonic missiles. We're looking at their new aircraft carriers. We're looking at rocket attacks. In reality, that is not the true focus of the Chinese military. The true focus of the Chinese military, because, we can say, oh, well, yeah, it's not fully a threat just yet in terms of their, let's say, kinetic, bullets and bombs, kinetic type threat. It's not too much yet for the U.S. to handle. But that's not the real tool of the Chinese military. That's not what a real war with China would look like. If we went to war with China, it would not, at least if we went to war soon, like within the next several years, it would not be jets and aircraft carriers and bombs, and it would not be troops fighting with guns on the streets. It would be the Assassin's Mace. Let me explain what this is. The Assassin's Mace is a program of the Chinese Communist Party that combines several kind of frontline or experimental weapons. and using these different tools in conjunction with each other, not necessarily to fight our military directly, but instead to eliminate the systems that create military advantage for the United States. Let me explain. Let me start by showing you this. This is a report from way back in 2004 from the New Atlantis, and it says this. It says, the architects of Chinese military transformation have also placed high priority on the acquisition of so-called Sha Xiaojian, or assassin's mace technologies. It says that while the exact meaning of the term remains elusive, the Pentagon report at that time back in 2004 says, quote, assassin's mace is used to designate a wide array of technologies that might afford an inferior military an advantage in a conflict with a superior military power. To this end, China has been beefing up its ballistic missile arsenal, which now totals over 500 and is growing at a startlingly high rate of 75 new missiles per year. It says Beijing knows, too, that the Achilles heel of the modern American military is in outer space. And there is no doubt that China is developing and seeking to employ a variety of anti-satellite weapons. It says presently the only means China is known to possess to disable America's intelligence and communications satellites is a nuclear warhead. Again, they're talking back in 2004. But they say that such weapons are impractical since the electromagnetic field they create, nuclear weapons, would also damage Chinese satellites. But press reports indicate that China has developed lasers that can disable low-orbiting satellites. China has also developed an array of miniature satellite technologies and is reportedly experimenting with parasitic microsatellites that could potentially latch onto an American satellite and disable it or hijack the information gathered by it. Now, this report is 2004, and so keep in mind a lot has changed since then, especially in terms of what we know about Assassin's Mace and especially what we know about the actual plans it has. I've reported on some of the Pentagon reports that came out, and there have not been a lot on Assassin's Mace. When you dig into Assassin's Mace, let me explain what it basically means. It means that American military power is, if you were to talk to people who work in NATO, if you were to talk to people who work in foreign militaries, they would talk about what is the power, what is the technological advantage of the American military. They would argue that, in terms of standing armies, China has a lot of troops, Russia has a lot of troops. A lot of other countries have a lot of potential soldiers, but America's military advantage is not necessarily in numbers. Our military advantage is in technology, and in particular in air control and in communications. You could have a very small special operations force that could command a very large military infrastructure. They could call in, for example, naval bombardments, communicating with our naval ships. They could call in, for example, airstrikes. You saw this, of course, in the wars in Iraq, where individual squads of U.S. Marines could call in, warthog strikes and so on key points. That is part of the capabilities of the United States. Small groups of soldiers, not large amounts of troops, but being supported by very powerful military assets. That very powerful military system that interconnects our military and creates the power we have relies on our communication systems and on, let's say, advanced weapon systems that depend on things like satellites, depend on information infrastructure, depend on electronic warfare, which gets into the realms of communication systems, the fights over bandwidth, where you're fighting over, for example, airwaves, and even denying access to airwaves. It gets a little complicated when you get into the realms of electromagnetic frequency, for example. And also, it ties into the ability of, let's say, what happens if the satellites go down? What happens if the electric systems go down? What happens if our communication systems go down? Then you get into the realm of what it means to operate in what they call the denied environment. And the concern you have is that China is not necessarily focused on taking out those soldiers on the ground. They're not necessarily focused on wiping out the individual fighting forces. They're looking at taking out the systems that enable that entire system. For example, if you dig into the Assassin's Mace program, they specifically talk about hemp attacks, HEMP, and that ties into high Earth orbit nuclear detonation, an attack that would wipe out satellites within entire orbits, and of course generate electromagnetic pulse to wipe out, or at least disable the United States, and of course cause long-term death. They talk about, for example, the use of germ warfare, the creation of bioweapons. They talk about the use of microwave weapons. In fact, I've read some of the military reports that China has on this, and they talk about actual experiments of microwave weapons on, let's say, animals. It has very gruesome details on the way that it damages the eyes of animals, for example. This is, of course, when we also delve into the areas of 5G technology and 5G towers, especially ones made by China, and especially not because you could argue on the safety of 5G. The issue is if you create a 5G system that could reach beyond its, let's say, stated capabilities to actually, cause, let's say, higher frequencies that could have a microwave weapon effect. You get into the areas of cyber warfare, and what we've been talking about today, the creation of cyber weapons, or even the use of cyber attacks to wage unconventional war, maybe economic war, where you're stealing, let's say, the plans and the designs of products and so on, and using those to leech away America's prosperity. You can eliminate the systems that enable us as a country, not even just enable our military. And the CCP is already doing all of this to an extent. They're already developing weapons of this sort in all these areas to an extent. And I do think America needs to respond to it, frankly, because if we allow them to continue developing on that front, it does present a very real threat to us. Michael Pillsbury, he wrote the book, The 100-Year Marathon. He actually warned about the Assassin's Mace as well. And in his book, I believe it is called The 100-Year Marathon, where he talks about China's 100-year plan against the United States, which I've also, written about and done stories on. And you might have seen my documentary, for example, called The Final War. I talk about as well China's 100-year plan against the United States. In the book 100-Year Marathon, Michael Pillsbury details that, within the Pentagon, you have a lot of war games. And these war games go over different scenarios where one person may play blue team, Team America, and another person may play red team, Team China or Team Soviet Union or Team, terrorist or whatever like that. And they try to defeat each other. The idea is to try to come up with scenarios that we need to defend against. You're looking at the capabilities of a foreign military, and you're employing their tactics and their methodologies and so on. Michael Pillsbury said the only time America has lost a war game of that sort was when he employed the Assassin's Mace program. And it does present a very real threat to us. And of course, that gets into the broader topic of what we've been discussing today, is that, well, how do you respond to it? Because once you, especially on the cyber front, once you start creating systems to defend against a potential threat like that, it has very serious implications for privacy, very serious implications for individual rights, and very serious implications of what type of world we're creating as so much of the world becomes increasingly reliant on computers and artificial intelligence and digital systems. If you create very deep governing bodies that can manage that entire infrastructure, what happens when that infrastructure expands to manage, almost every element of our daily lives? It means you've created, Big Brother times 10. You've outdone George Orwell in anything he could have imagined. This is a problem for the future of society. This is a problem we're going to need to very seriously address as a civilization. How do we balance the emerging security threats with the basic rights we have as individuals protected by the Constitution? I think this is probably just the beginning stages of a very long debate we need to have as an American society and as the entire world. Now, that being said, talking about China, something else is happening right now, which is the CCP is not doing so hot. In fact, even Taiwan, yes, as we're waiting to see whether the CCP is going to invade Taiwan, the Taiwanese leadership itself, including the president there, they are downplaying the China threat right now, which is very interesting because the CCP is facing some really serious problems. Let me show you this. It says the president of Taiwan made a statement at the recent New York Times Deal Book Summit, and they're saying the Chinese regime right now has too many internal problems to invade Taiwan. The timing of this statement, it's kind of odd, in my opinion, because Taiwan right now is getting a lot of international attention. It's getting a lot of international support. Technically, it's in Taiwan's interest to say, hey, yeah, China's a huge threat. Support us more. If you look at Ukraine and compare the difference, Zelensky's saying we're under massive threat. You're not going to see Zelensky downplay the Russian threat because they're getting billions and billions of dollars. We're propping up their pensions. We're giving them weapons. We're unloading, our entire defense budget onto them, and we're propping up the whole country, essentially. Taiwan is getting a lot of attention right now, too. And they could use that attention to get those benefits as well. But interestingly, they're doing the opposite right now. Taiwan right now is downplaying the China threat. It doesn't make practical sense if you're talking about them trying to gain benefit and financial benefits, which raises some real issues. Because what they're talking about are some of the actual serious issues taking place inside of China right now. And the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is frankly not doing so hot. Let me show you the statement from the Taiwanese president. Watch this.
I think the Chinese leadership at this juncture is overwhelmed by its internal challenges. And my thought is that perhaps this is not a time for them to consider a major invasion of Taiwan.
Because of the economic challenges in China right now?
No, largely because the internal economic and financial as well as political challenges, but also the international community has made it loud and clear that war is not an option, and peace and stability serves everybody's interests.
Now, given all of this in context, let me give my take. The Chinese Communist Party is not doing well right now. Its economy is in shambles, it's falling apart, it's losing a lot of international business. A lot of countries, including the United States, including a lot of countries that the CCP depends on for foreign investment, major investment firms, Vanguard, BlackRock, different states that put our pensions into China. The CCP is losing a lot of that money right now. And as they deal with what appears to be a new COVID outbreak or some weird virus outbreak, there is a very real potential that the CCP may have to lock down again, or at least they're talking about it. Another economic lockdown for China is destructive to the future of their economy. Unless the whole world follows along with it, and there's no signs currently the rest of the world will do it, because I think we learned what happened last time. Meaning the CCP is in a very dangerous state. It is crumbling. It is losing support. It is breaking financially, and it has no future if it continues on this trajectory. Now, that being said, China, the Chinese Communist Party right now, also presents a very real threat. Not necessarily in terms of military, conventional military threat, because their military on the physical, kinetic side is, in my opinion, not advanced enough yet to really pose much of a real war threat against maybe the United States or other major countries. But they do pose a very real threat on the unconventional warfare front. The very real threat of a crippling global cyber attack, the very real threat of using germ warfare, the very real threat of, let's say, a bio attack using the different types of weird experiments they're doing on biometrics and so on, targeting DNA strands of different races. All of this is very real in the world, even though the CCP is, in my opinion, dying right now. It's like a cornered wolf, like an injured animal. It is not doing well, but it's also very dangerous. And I think the world should keep that in mind. As the CCP faces major crisis, it is becoming increasingly dangerous on the unconventional warfare front. And I do think we need to be vigilant of this, and I do think that there are some really serious, tangible threats on that. That said, let's jump into some questions, folks. Let's see here. All right. Let me jump over to my laptop. And good to see you all also. Yeah, we're still on YouTube and stuff. As a reminder, every Tuesday and Thursday, I'll do the full episode on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere else. And of course, every other day, we will still do the full episodes only on Epoch TV, EpochTV.com. Because what I'm going to do is take all the stuff I can't talk about on YouTube and put it on those days where we're not going to be on YouTube. So all the extra spicy content, you need to come over to Epoch TV for that still. And I need to maintain that system, aside from the point that, Epoch TV is what keeps us running. It's what keeps the show going, because we're still pretty heavily censored on YouTube. Having Epoch TV lets me cover the topics that I really want to talk about. Some stuff that I, again, can't show you on YouTube. So let's jump into some questions. Bob Campbell, you're saying we must harden our systems and chase after the foreign military's abilities to alter correctly functioning systems. I'd agree. The other concern we're going to start having is they're creating computers with AI-powered chips, and that is going to raise some questions over, let's say, the ability of a private business, to monitor and regulate your computer, especially as AI becomes increasingly government-controlled because of some of these executive orders. We do start getting into the realm of, again, government control over even individual laptops or individual devices as you start using AI within it, because, again, the executive orders from the Biden administration and from the EU and other places do allow really deep government regulation of anything with AI. And so we're going to deal with that. But I'd agree that on the military front, we need to start looking at unconventional warfare is the real threat. Al Clark, you're saying, my friends installing power lines and transformers tell me that the CCP builds their own access into the big equipment they sell to us, but our guys remove it before installation. That's a big concern as well. They call that supply chain threats. It's not just in major electronics, it's also even in military equipment. A lot of these debates go back to the Obama administration. Obama tried addressing it. Donald Trump tried addressing it. Biden's talking about addressing it. None of them have been able to fully resolve it. This all started, let me give you some background on that. During the Obama administration, there was an internal study in the U.S. military and an audit of some of our advanced military equipment, including our advanced fighter jets. And they found that some of the equipment, including being used in our fifth-generation fighter jets, was coming from China. They found, now part of the reports were classified, so we never fully knew what they found, but it started this huge debate of trying to root out supply chain threats, they called it. Because we get a lot of core components, individual pieces for circuits, individual parts that are not manufactured in the United States that we have to get from China, that are finding their way into our tanks, into our jets, into our military infrastructure. And there were two big concerns that were raised. One is that some of these might be non-functional, that, for example, that they just don't work. Two could be that the CCP has built-in firmware level threats. Firmware is different from software. If you install a program on your computer, you call that software. If you install an app on your phone, you go to the App Store and you install an app, that's software. But there's also apps, or you could call it software, at the chip level, at the level of the chips inside of your phone. And these exist in areas that you can't access through the surface, interface of a device. That's your firmware. They've found instances where China was putting viruses or backdoor access or other things at the firmware level, including spying technologies, including systems that would allow remote access, where Chinese businesses, for example, could access the back end of devices. That's firmware threat. And the concern was that as we were bringing in, let's say, foreign equipment, like you mentioned, some of these key parts for our electric grid, as we're buying foreign parts for our military equipment, that there could be firmware threats that you can't detect on the surface, that could be remotely accessed, shut down, manipulated, or even given alternate commands, maybe false commands during time of war. That is one of the real serious threats that was raised at that time. Obama tried addressing it, or at least said he was. They never fixed it. Donald Trump tried addressing it. They never fixed it. Biden tried addressing it, and here we are right now. This is a very real problem. It pertains to every single electronic device that has any part coming from China, which is most of them. Patrick Allen, you're saying, let's put the operation on the cloud. What could possibly go wrong? Yeah, I know, seriously, right? On the cloud, of course, is, what people mean by having something that's run from the internet. And, we've had conversations on the show before of, what happens if we make digital currency? What happens if we make everything digital? And then what happens if the digital side gets hit by a cyber attack or an EMP, or let's say like a solar flare, God forbid, and shuts it all down, and then the entire society we built comes crumbling down around us because it was all running off technology that depends on those things that were just destroyed. We're constructing the noose to hang ourselves as we go down this road, unfortunately. Steve Ting 73, you said, gosh, I wonder what all those Chinese that came in through the border are doing here. Is anyone watching them? That's a very real threat as well, especially as you have Democrats right now pushing to allow illegal aliens to be able to join our military and gain U.S. citizenship. What happens if China sends in, let's say, 5,000 or 10,000 people a day or a month to illegally enter the United States and then start joining our military? Well, you're going to start having some real problems. And even if they don't, if you just have foreign fighters present, that's another real problem. Jay Coney, you're saying, Josh, do you think the Democrats are pushing to keep borders open in hopes of a major terror attack? In hopes of a major terror attack? Just so they can invoke all kinds of control and place much Orwellian CCP laws where the American would be okay with it because of an attack of such scale or type? By the way, I'm drinking Jeju green tea from South Korea because I was just there. It's possible. I've seen some different reports on, again, we talked about the assassin's mace in China, what a war with China would look like. There were reports, very concerning ones, of what war with China would look like, including the CCP's use of terrorist attacks. If we go back not even to Assassin's Mace, but to their unrestricted warfare doctrine, they also talk about the use of terrorist attacks. And these terrorist attacks could not be limited maybe to, let's say, Chinese nationals illegally crossing the border and working as soldiers. It could also be the CCP's direct work with street gangs, the CCP's direct work with international terrorist organizations, including Hamas or whatever else, including the CCP's work as a proxy through Iran, which is the world's largest terrorist sponsor. And if the CCP could maybe advise Iran on threats of this sort or coordinate them in a future war that manipulates those networks. We can look at history where almost every major war was precluded, or at least over the last couple, 150 years. Every major war was precluded by some disaster. Our Pearl Harbor, the sinking of the Bismarck, the burning of the Reichsflag in Germany. Every major conflict had a powder keg that set it off, and there are rumors right now, and I think very valid concerns among Americans, that we could see a false flag attack or a real attack. The 9/11, right, the destruction of the World Trade Centers, that could be used as an excuse to launch a new war and to create a government response. The new Patriot Act, the new War Powers Act of some sort, that would also enable the creation of a totalitarian response that would be deemed necessary to mitigate the emerging threat. And also, part of the effect of these previous attacks, the Pearl Harbor, the 9/11, was that it drummed up public sentiment. It united people with a common cause and a common willingness to fight a war. What America right now is lacking, as we talk about possible global war, what America is lacking right now is the patriots of the country having a willingness right now to fight the wars being presented to us. I don't think a lot of Trump supporters would want to go and fight in Ukraine and against Russian troops. I think the unpopularity of that has already reached a point where most people would not volunteer for a war of that sort. And of course, that ties into a lot of potential international conflicts. The willingness of the patriots of this country, who are the fighting class of this country, is not there. The military is having a recruiting crisis. People don't seem to want to join. And so there is a very real concern of, how are they going to make people want to join? And there are some people, spreading rumors, of course, saying, well, maybe they'll launch the new 9/11 or something. I mean, I don't know. It's all hypothetical, but you never know. Norway for Trump, you're saying, having personally paid $3,463 for our new F-35 fighters, which are our fifth-generation fighter jets, which taxpayers are shouldering a lot for. You're saying, I would very much like to know how that same fighter just pops up in communist China under the name J-31. Yeah, so China, the Chinese Communist Party, of course, has been stealing intellectual property, including breaching breaching private companies, because a lot of our military equipment comes from private companies like Raytheon and so on. Stealing their plans or using different traps to get the technicians involved in those projects to, let's say, become unofficial spies for the Chinese Communist Party. Maybe they get a pretty Chinese girlfriend, for example, who just happens to work for the PRC. And then, they start handing her all the weapons plans. There have been cases of this, by the way. There was a case in Hawaii of a contractor for the Pentagon, and that this Pentagon contractor had a Chinese girlfriend who was just fascinated by U.S. nuclear capabilities. And as the way of courting his beautiful Chinese girlfriend, he would give her all of our nuclear secrets. He got charged criminally. The woman never did. But that's one of the ways that, international espionage works, to steal plans and equipment and so on. The CCP tends to bypass the very expensive process of research and development, which costs us a whole lot of money on defense spending, and which gives us our military edge. The CCP instead just tries stealing it. And by stealing it, they're able to develop things a lot cheaper. The reality with the Chinese J-31 fighter jet, though, is that it's not as capable, at least in my opinion, as they claim it is. I've read a lot of analysis, and I've done a lot of analysis myself on the design of the jet, and the claims that it, for example, has fifth-generation fighter jet capabilities is just based on the design alone is not really accurate. You could say that it incorporates elements that appear to be similar to our advanced fighter jets like the F-35 and so on. But if you look at some of the design elements, it's not quite there. And I think there's a lot of... the CCP is putting on a bit of a show. The Chinese Communist Party at this point still has to buy its jet engines from Russia because it still can't even develop those by itself. It's not as advanced as it wants the world to think it is. Although I do think we need to take the issue of Chinese economic theft and stealing our war plans and designs, we need to take it very seriously. But there's also the very large picture of, let's say, smoke and mirrors. There's the very large picture of deception. And that's also a big part of war, the fog of war, right? That said, folks, that's all for today. I'll join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll talk about more stuff. Real quick, we do have an official Crossroads email now. That is crossroads@epochtimes.com. EpochTimes.com. Crossroads@epochtimes.com. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think that there's a real threat from China on the cyber front? I want to hear more about what some of you are saying about issues with the electric grid. Do you know things that I haven't been talking about? Do you think I'm missing something? Send me your thoughts. Crossroads@epochtimes.com. Again, trying to create kind of a two-way street between me and everybody else out there, and I want to hear your thoughts. Tell me what you think. That said, folks, also we have a 25-cent sale right now for Epoch TV. So all those on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Rumble, come join us on Epoch TV. Again, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm doing the whole episodes here. But every other day, I'm going to be talking about things I can't talk about on YouTube because they'll probably ban me for it. Join me for that on EpochTV.com because I'll be doing shorter episodes those days on those channels. But the full episode's still on Epoch TV, and of course the Q&As as well. That said, folks, again, 25-cent sale right now. Come and join us, and also by doing so, you support us, and you also get access to a lot of other content, not just my show, but others as well. All right, folks, that said, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all of you, and as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.